Remember how in the last video I said you should expect the next one to come soon? Oh my god. How did that? Remember how I said in the last video how you should expect this video to come out soon, since I had already played all the hands that I was going to put in this video. So you can expect that to come very soon because I've already played all the hands that I'm going to talk about. Sorry for being so late. Hey everyone, welcome back. I just finished fall quarter of school and I was busy studying for finals and doing other things, but still no excuse to come out with this so late because I've had plenty of time to film it. Like I said in the last episode, I don't have whole card cam footage for these hands that I'm going to include. I was just trying to focus on playing and didn't intend to vlog, but some interesting hands came up. All these hands come from a few sessions I played at a home game that I used to go to somewhat frequently. It's pretty close to where I live, so it's really the only nearby place I can play poker. So after going to the bike for a while, which you saw in the previous vlogs, I decided the drive was a little too long and I started coming back to this home game. I'm about to go get a haircut because I'm going somewhere tomorrow, but before that, let's go through the first interesting hand. We're playing 7-handed. The blinds at this home game are 1-2, and I look down at ace-8 offsuit in the low jack. I decide to make it 12. Action folds to the big blind, who defends. The player in the big blind is a pretty solid player as far as I can tell. I hadn't seen him at this home game too much, but I knew that he was a regular there, and from what I'd seen so far, he seemed like a pretty standard player. So we go heads up to a flop, which comes King 6 Queen 2 hearts. The big blind checks it over to me, and this board hits my range, and I don't really have too many ways to improve, so I decide to take a stab at it and bet 15. And the big blind calls. The turn brings another 6, putting a second flush draw on the board. The big blind checks it over to me again, and I decide to bet again. I don't think my opponent should have too many kings in his range. He probably would 3-bet a lot of his stronger kings here, so I'm putting him on some kind of flush draw that called the flop, or possibly second pair, and I think I can get those hands to fold, so I put out a bet of 30, and he once again calls. So we're gonna need some help here on the river. The river brings an offsuit 8, which is a pretty interesting card, because we now have showdown value, and all flush draws missed. This time, the big blind leads out for $90 into about 115 or so. So it's a little more than 3/4 of the pot. Pretty much never putting him on a King X type hand. Like I said earlier, he would have probably 3-bet Ace King and King Queen. And if he had some kind of weak king, I think he would go into check call mode or bet smaller. So he's basically saying that he has trips or better, or nothing. It's kind of hard for me to put him on a 6 since the only hands he should realistically have are like 7-6 suited, 6-5 suited, and ace-6 every now and then. He is in the big blind, and since this is a good player, I think he'd be 3-betting 7-6 suited or 6-5 suited most of the time. So we can eliminate a good number of those from his range. And if he did have a hand like trips, I think he'd be raising the turn since it's just so wet. Very unlikely he has 6s either. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't raise the flop, and he can get called by so many hands that are worse. All my top pair hands, King Queen, flush draws, straight draws, combo draws. So it's kind of hard for me to put him on any value hands here, and meanwhile he could still have all the bluffs. So I actually think about it for not too long and make the call with my pair of 8s, and he rolls over pocket 6s for quads. So I was completely incorrect here. He had the absolute nuts. And fun fact, at this home game you actually get a $50 bonus every time you hit quads. So in addition to getting pretty much maximum value from my hand, he also got an extra $50 to go along with it. Looking back on the hand, I don't hate my call on the river too much. I guess I could have folded pre-flop, but as played, I think call on the river's fine for the reasons I mentioned before. I just don't see him having too many very strong value hands here when he bets this large. So probably would have still made the call if I were somehow ever to be in this situation again. All right, I'm gonna go to my haircut because I'm almost late. We're here. This is the before, and this is the after. 2 on the sides, and then depending on how long the hair is, I'll either trim it or I won't. All right, let's get into another hand. In this next hand, I look down at ace-7 of spades in under the gun +1. The under the gun player, who is actually the host of this home game, raises to 4. He's known to make pretty small raises, so this isn't a sizing teller or anything. I decide to go ahead and 3-bet my suited ace. I make it 15, action folds back to the host of the home game, and he makes the call. So we're heads up to a flop, which comes 5 King Jack, 2 spades. He checks it over to me, and obviously I'm gonna bet here with my nut flush draw. I put out a bet of 20, and he makes the call. The turn brings a 10 of diamonds, I believe, bringing a second flush draw on the board. So we now are drawing to the nut straight and the nut flush. Under the gun checks it over to me again. This time I put out a bet of 40. Probably could have sized it up here since the board gets more wet. The under the gun player calls again. So don't really think he has any hands here that aren't beating me. He raised under the gun. The king of spades is on the board, and the ace of spades is in my hand. So again, looking for some help here on the river. The river comes an offsuit king. He checks it over to me again. So kind of strange. I think the weakest hand he should have if he called up to this point is something like King Queen. I guess if he was trapping with aces, which a lot of people might do at these lower stakes. Under the gun +2 raises to 10, the cutoff calls, and he shows pocket aces. then there's a chance he has aces and he just wants to get to showdown. But if he did have something like king queen, I think he should definitely be betting here because it makes it less likely that I have a strong hand I can bet with. So if I did have something like aces, and the battery ran out, so I'm using my phone now. As I was saying, if he does have a hand as strong as king queen or better, which is what I assume he should have, then it kind of blocks value hands I could have. The only hand I could see him trapping with here is something like pocket jacks. Definitely a hand he could have called a 3-bet with and then checked a trap, since I am kind of repping a king. At the time, I just felt like he was very weak, and the check also seemed to signify weakness at that point. I also do have an ace, so it does make it less likely that he has ace king or ace queen, which is what I could rep, and I can't really win the hand without betting at this point. So I decide to bet 75. If he does have a value hand, it's probably something strong enough to raise, and if he does have some kind of draw by some odd chance, then I don't think I need to bet too large to get him to fold. So he goes into the tank, which is good news. He says it's a good bet, and after playing around with his cards for a bit and looking like he's going to fold, he eventually makes a call. I tell him he's good, and he shows pocket queens. So he hero called us all the way down and ended up catching a bluff. So unfortunately, my hero calls aren't going that well, and I'm getting hero called myself. So not the best session so far. Currently at Target, I'm gonna go get myself a kombucha for the trip tomorrow, and I need to go to the ATM real quick to get some money. Back with the old camera with the new battery. In this next hand, I look down at pocket aces in the hijack. Action folds to me and I raise it up to 10. The button calls and the blinds call. So we're 4 ways to a flop, which comes 7-9-7 rainbow. Action checks to me and I put out a small c-bet here since the board is so dry. I make it 15 and the button raises me to 50. The blinds fold and now action is back on me. Obviously not gonna fold here, but there aren't too many draws on this board. Pretty much just 10-8 and 8-6. I suppose he could also have 2 overcards with some kind of backdoor flush draw. So maybe something like Jack-10 with a backdoor flush draw, Ace-X with a backdoor flush draw. Also, for extra information, the button was a young player who seemed like a pretty solid tight aggressive player. So we're heads up to a turn, which brings the 8 of spades. I check it over to the button. He continues firing and puts out a bet of 75. Not really the best card for me because now it's less likely that he has both of the bluffs I mentioned earlier, 10-8 and 8-6. But once again, I can't really fold aces here, so I make the call once again. It is kind of a weird situation though because this player only has a little over 200 left behind and the pot's going to be around 300 at this point, and I'm probably going to face a shove regardless of the river card. So I don't really know if this is a spot where I should consider shoving to charge draws a maximum. In this situation, there aren't really that many draws on the board. The river brings an offsuit 4. I check it over to the button again, hoping to get the showdown, and unfortunately he shoves here. Not a good situation. On this run out, it's really hard for him to have any bluffs. He also seemed very confident, but I just couldn't find the fold button here. I ended up making the call, and he shows us 8-7 suited. So he had a full house, doubled through us, and yeah, can't win when we have bluffs, can't win when we have aces. So those were all the hands from the first session I played after returning back to this home game. Ended up booking a loss of $601. Played for 3 hours and 42 minutes, so that is an hourly rate of negative 162.43. Biggest loss in one session so far in my poker career, if you would call it that. So that was on October 17th. So again, sorry for being so late. This next session was on October 24th. Only one interesting hand from the session, but it's pretty interesting. So I look down at A6 of spades in under the gun +1. I raise it up to 12, and the under the gun +2 player to my direct left 3 bets to $25. Before we get into the actual action of this hand, I don't even know where to begin describing this player. This player acts out of turn at least once in maybe like 2/3 of the hands that he plays, and that's not even an exaggeration. I mean, sometimes it can seem like angle shooting, but this player just seems so genuinely confused about what's going on all the time that I can't really tell at this point. He'll often get to showdown and not know who's won, raises to sizes that aren't allowed. Yeah, this guy's just all over the place. Definitely the type of player you want at your table. With all that being said, action folds back to me in under the gun +1, and I make the call. Very happy to be playing any suited ace or any decent hand for that matter against this player, even out of position. So we are heads up to a flop, which comes 7 Jack 6, 2 spades. We flop bottom pair and the nut flush draw. I check it over to the under the gun +2 player, expecting him to bet, and he goes ahead and bets 45 into like 50 or 55, something like that. I make the call here. We're both the deepest stacks at the table. He has me covered, and we both started the hand with around like 250 big blinds. The turn brings my gem card, the 9 of spades. So we have essentially the nuts. Very hard to believe that even this player should have 10-8 of spades for a straight flush when he 3-bets from early position, even though he's not really thinking about all those things. I check it over to him again. He goes ahead and bets 60 pretty quickly. Gonna put in a raise here. I want to get the money in as soon as possible, considering how deep our stacks are. I make it 175. He tries to re-raise and doesn't put in enough money for a full re-raise. So the dealer actually helps him out, and it ends up being a min raise. Don't think there's much of a choice here. I decide to shove it all in there for probably 400 something effective. And now he looks pretty disappointed. Seems like he knows he's beat, but very quickly makes the call anyways. At this home game, when players are all in, the dealer asks if we want to make any deals. I say run it once. The river brings the jack. He confidently tables king jack with no spade. I show my hand, and of course it's good. Any other player at that table would have for sure folded almost anything to a 4-bet shove on the turn, but not this guy. So we scoop a pot that is about $1,100, which is the biggest pot I've ever played in my life. Obviously not too impressive compared to a lot of the pots you might see at 2-5, 5-10 and higher, but definitely glad to be on the winning side of this. Trying to get this vlog that I'm filming right now finished before tomorrow's trip because I am going to be pretty busy. Also enjoying my kombucha. I know I said I bought it for the trip, but then I just started drinking it out of habit, so might as well finish it now. A while later, after editing, now it's time to film another hand history. This session is from October 27th. I am in the hijack with ace-3 offsuit. There are 2 limps, and I decide to raise it up to 10. And the 2 limpers who are in under the gun and under the gun +1 make the call. So 3 raised to a flop, which comes 6, 7, 10, 2 diamonds. Action checks to me, and I decide to take a stab and bet 20. Under the gun folds, and the under the gun +1 player calls. This player is a regular at this home game. I'd say he's a little on the looser side, but he's definitely a standard player. So with that, we are headed to a turn, which brings the king of hearts. Definitely hits my range much better than his. He checks it over to me again, and I decide I'm gonna rep the king. I put out a bet of 35. Could have gone a bit bigger here to charge draws the maximum, as it is a pretty coordinated board. He makes the call once again. The river is a pretty interesting card. It's the 7 of diamonds, so it completes the diamond draw and pairs the board. And this time my opponent leads out for $45, which is pretty small. I think the pot's around 150-ish at this point. So I don't think this player is bluffing too often here. When he bets small though, it could also mean that he's trying to set his own price for showdown if he does have some kind of marginal hand that he doesn't want to call off a big bet with. When I notice good players limping in lower stakes games, it's usually when they have a hand that plays pretty well, but normally wouldn't be playing that position. But they decide to limp in anyways because there's less of a chance that you're going to get punished by someone raising since we are playing at lower stakes. So even though he wasn't early position, he could have some random like king jack or king 10, any hands of that sort. I do have the ace of diamonds, so I am blocking the nut flush. I have a little over $200 behind, so it's actually a pretty good amount to shove here as a bluff. And I do have the nut flush blocker, and I think his range is actually pretty capped. If he did flop a set or a straight, I'm pretty sure he would have raised either on the flop or on the turn. So it's very unlikely he has very, very strong hands here. And meanwhile, I could have all of those strong hands, and in addition to that, I could have the nut flush. So I think my range is highly favored in this situation, and as I mentioned earlier, this player is pretty standard, though he is a bit loose. So I definitely give him credit to being able to fold a weak flush here or anything else really strong. I decide there's a good opportunity with my blocker, and I go ahead and shove it all in there for 226 effective. And good news is my opponent does not snap. He contemplated it for a bit, and after playing around with his cards for a bit, he makes a fold. So we get it through, and finally things are starting to go our way and took down a pretty sizable pot. In this next hand, I am in the low jack with ace king. The under the gun player, who is the same guy from before, limps in. I raise it up to 10. The cutoff, who is a very fishy player, makes the call, and the under the gun player goes ahead and 3-bets. He limp re-raises to $35. Action folds back to me. I'm going to put in a 4-bet here. I make it 120. The cutoff folds, and the under the gun player thinks for a bit and ends up making the call. So we are heads up to a flop, and the flop comes king 6 ace 2 clubs. So pretty much the best flop you can ask for when you have ace king. The under the gun player checks it over to me. The pot is around 240, 250, and I have a little under 400 left in my stack. I decide to put out a bet of 80, which is a little less than a third pot. 1, to set up for a shove, and 2, if he has a hand like queens or jacks, then he's gonna have to fold anyways. And he goes ahead and makes the call. The turn brings another 6. He checks it over to me, and interestingly enough, I actually decide to check back. I know I said that I was planning to shove the turn, which is why I bet so small on the flop, but what I failed to think about was, what does his range look like when he calls the flop? And at the time, I just couldn't think of any weaker hands in his range that called a 4-bet then call the bet on the flop that I'm getting value from. The river comes a complete blank. The under the gun player thinks about it for a bit and checks it over to me again. I actually think about it for not that long and actually check back once again with my top 2 pair on this board. The reason was exactly the same as on the turn. It just seemed like a weird situation, and I don't think I can get 2 streets of value from any weaker hands that he called a 4-bet with. It seems like I'm chopping at best against ace king, and this player was definitely capable of flatting a 4-bet with aces or kings. Yeah, decide to check back, and as soon as I do so, he says full house and shows the remaining 2 aces. 4 aces full of 6s. So pretty sick cooler here. Definitely could have gone a lot worse if he had 5-bet pre-flop and I had called it off. Looking back, I think I would have made the same decision to check back the turn in the river. I really can't think of any hands I'm getting value from. I messaged Ton Mai, who is one of my poker friends, if you remember him from last episode, and he agreed with how I played it, said he would have lost more. He also said that my opponent should have bet the river, which I'd say I totally agree with. If my opponent puts me on queens, aces, kings, and ace king when I 4-bet, don't see any reason for him not to bet the river. Yes, it's reasonable for him to expect me to bet ace king, aces, kings on the river. Obviously I can't have aces since he has those, but if I'm going to bet those, then I have to call those either way. I started the hand with 5-17, which means I had 3-17 behind on the river. So if he puts me on that range, then he should be going for max value in that situation by putting me all in. And if he thinks I have queens, then I'm probably not going to bet that anyways, so he might as well bet with pretty much the nuts. Fortunately for me, he did not do that. Not really easy to get away from ace king in that situation. Actually pretty happy with how I played this hand. If I was being a little bit more nitpicky, I'd say I can actually go a little bit smaller on the flop and bet something like 60. That leaves me with a little closer to a pot size bet left. If my opponent had queens or jacks, he should know that I'm pretty much setting up for a turn shove, even though I didn't do that in this situation. So he would kind of have to fold queens and jacks anyways. Definitely happy to not have gotten it all in. Just finished editing all of that, and now it's time to take the dogs on a walk before packing for the trip tomorrow. Alright, it's almost midnight. I've actually spent all of today filming and editing on the same day for the poker vlog that you're watching right now, which is something I hadn't done for the previous ones. So it's been a lot of work. I should probably get going to bed for the trip tomorrow. But before I go, just want to thank you all for almost 1,500 subscribers. You should expect to see another poker vlog very soon, and this time I mean it, because if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm going back to Vegas